There's a very specific kind of childhood optimism when you bring a Game Boy Advance outside. Like the sun is not about to become the final boss of visibility. You sit on a porch or in the backseat of a car or at some family gathering and you tilt the screen around like you're trying to contact a satellite. A little more left, a little more right, now your reflection is in it. Now Torchic is gone. Now you can see half a menu and what might be a zigzagoon, and somehow that is part of the memory. Pokemon Emerald feels like it belongs to that exact kind of day. And for me, that memory is painfully specific. I remember sitting on the deck of a lake house my family had rented for a weekend, playing Emerald in the summer breeze, like I'd been personally hired to monitor the situation in Hoenn. Warm air, lake noise, Game Boy Advance buttons, battery light making threats, Hoenn music looping while everybody else was probably doing normal lake house things. So when I say Emerald feels like summer, I'm not starting from some theory. I'm starting from that deck. It is the Pokemon game that feels the most like summer to me. Not because it has beaches, although it has enough water to make Kyogre happy. Not because every town is sunny, because Hoenn also has rain, ash caves, a desert, a volcano. It feels like summer because the whole game has the warm, loose, slightly too bright feeling that the world is big, but not scary. There's time to surf around for no reason, or spend a whole afternoon decorating a secret base, or lose to the battle frontier and pretend you were just gathering information for your next battle. I know calling Emerald the greatest Pokemon game is a dumb little trap I've set for myself. The Platinum people are here, somewhere a Pokemon Coliseum defender just started typing away. Like, I respect all of that, but I'm still picking Emerald as my favorite game. Because Emerald sits in the perfect little window where Pokemon already knew what it was, but had not yet become the giant national product Pokemon has become. It is small enough to feel like a world you can hold. By the time Emerald arrived, Pokemon had already gone through the late 90s phase. Red and Blue were bigger than games. They were playground arguments, lunchbox art, link cables, missing homework, trading cards, VHS tapes, Burger King toys, and every adult in your life learning the word Pikachu against their will. Then Gold and Silver came in and somehow made the world feel twice as big. A new region, new Pokemon, day and night cycles, breeding Pokemon, held items, and then because Game Freak was apparently feeling unreasonable, the old region shows back up after the credits. That's the kind of sequel that makes every future sequel's job even harder. Ruby and Sapphire had to follow that, and they had to do it on new hardware after the first giant wave had cooled down a little. Junichi Masuda had talked about that period like there was a real fear Pokemon might be trending downward, or maybe it had already peaked. Which is funny now because Pokemon peaking is one of those predictions humans keep making right before it sells another mountain of games and cardboard. But in that moment, Ruby and Sapphire had a hard job. They could not be more Kanto, they could not be more Johto. They had to prove Pokemon still had a future on the Game Boy Advance. And that is why Hoenn feels so different. Kanto is a clean little adventure map, Johto is older, calmer, more traditional. Hoenn is humid. It feels like the series opened a window and let the weather in. Suddenly, Pokemon felt brighter and more alive. Ash fell in the grass, tides moved on the coast, and the bad guys were fighting over land and sea like the region was being managed by two rival weather apps. And then Emerald comes in as the third version and does what third versions are supposed to do at their best. It does not make a totally new game, it makes the game that was already there feel finished. That is important because Emerald is not great because it is the most shocking Pokemon game. It is great because it is the cleanest version of one of Pokemon's best moods. The summer feeling starts with the map. Hoenn does not feel like a straight line of towns connected by grass. It feels like someone took a vacation brochure, a weather report, and a kid's bug-catching memory and shook them together until an RPG came out. And that is not by accident. Masuda said Ruby and Sapphire's region was inspired by Kyushu, where he spent childhood holidays with his grandparents. Beach, snorkeling, forest, catching insects. It's almost too perfect. Because Hoenn is full of places that feel like they were designed by someone remembering how big summer felt when they were small. Little Root is not a grand starting village. It is barely a village. It is a few houses, a lab, trees, and the feeling that your mom has just moved you somewhere where there is absolutely nothing to do except to become a regional champ, which is one way to handle boredom. Petalburg is your dad's gym town, which immediately makes the game feel more personal than usual. Then you hit Petalburg Woods, and the region starts doing that Hoenn thing where every area feels like a different summer activity. The woods becomes a beach, which becomes a cave, which becomes a downhill bike road, which becomes a port city. Later on, it gets weirder. A volcano, a field where the ash falls on you, a route where it rains every time you go there, a treehouse city, a town floating on logs, A whole city built inside a crater. Underwater paths because at some point Game Freak was just showing off. That is not subtle. Hoenn is basically a field trip where the bus driver lost the schedule and decided to become a cartographer. Sleepport is the first big proof. It's not really a city as much as a working port that someone glued a beach, a market, and a museum to. You can almost hear the cheap flip-flops slapping against the pavement. And then the game just keeps returning to water. Dewford is an island town with a cave. Lily Cove feels like a seaside shopping trip. Pacifidlog is just floating there like everyone collectively decided land was overrated. Suitopolis looks impossible, which is one of my favorite kinds of Pokemon town. You get there and you're like, okay, so everyone lives in this big rock bowl. Alright, I guess that's fine. I've accepted Stranger from this franchise. The official Pokemon site points out that a good portion of Hoenn is covered in water. And like, yeah, we noticed that. Some people noticed with anger. But the water is more than a root type in Hoenn. It is the texture of the region. It makes the place feel warm and spread out. It makes the world feel like it continues past the grass. Kanto had water, Johto had water, Hoenn is water. That is why it feels like summer. Summer is not efficient, summer is wandering around, getting sunburned, drinking something a bit too sweet, and realizing you had spent an hour doing nothing, but it still counts as a day. Hoenn has that energy. The Game Boy Advance did a lot for Pokemon without making it feel too modern. That is a strange balance, and Emerald lives right in the middle of it. Red and Blue were amazing, but they are also very crunchy now. Gold and Silver are prettier, especially on the Game Boy Color, but they still feel like tiny tile worlds running on pure imagination and battery acid. Ruby and Sapphire were the first main Pokemon games on the Game Boy Advance, and you can feel the hardware immediately. The colors are brighter, the towns have actual detail, the water finally looks like water instead of a checkerboard, and the Pokemon sprites have a lot more personality. And Emerald adds those little animated entrances when a Pokemon shows up for a battle, which is such a small thing and also exactly the kind of small thing that works on my brain. A Pokemon comes in and he moves a little. That is it. It just wiggles enough to feel alive. The Game Boy Advance era also had this physical feeling that is hard to separate from the games. The cartridge, the tiny label art, the way the buttons felt, the way the SP folded shut like you were ending a very important business meeting. And because Emerald is portable, Hoenn becomes attached to wherever you played it. On the couch, in the car, at a cousin's house, on vacation. This is part of why Emerald feels warmer than some bigger Pokemon games. Modern Pokemon can be huge, but the hardware around it is cleaner and brighter and online and constantly patched, which is its own kind of distance. Emerald feels like a little sealed climate. You turn it on and you're back in the same weather. Emerald also works because Ruby and Sapphire gave it a stronger foundation than people sometimes admit. It is easy to talk about Hoenn as the water region and just stop there, but Generation 3 quietly changed a lot of how Pokemon felt. Abilities and natures meant two of the same Pokemon stopped feeling like copies from the same office printer. Double battles meant fights were not just two creatures politely taking turns in a hallway. Weather stopped being a temporary battle effect and became part of the world. Then there were secret bases, which let you carve out a little room in the map and fill it with mats, dolls, and the kind of furniture choices that prove children should not be given full interior design authority. And contests gave Pokemon something to do besides violence. Not that the violence was going anywhere, this is still Pokemon after all. We are still telling a raccoon to headbutt a mushroom in the woods. But Hoenn made the world feel like the Pokemon existed outside of the gym ladder. A summer game needs side stuff. It needs little distractions that do not feel like homework. Secret bases are perfect for that. They're not necessary in the way gyms are necessary. You can just completely ignore them. But if you were the right age, finding a good base spot felt important in a way that is kind of hard to explain to a tax-paying adult. Pokemon is always about collecting creatures, but Hoenn made the region itself feel collectible. A ribbon, a decoration, a berry patch, a contest move, a weather route you remembered because it rained there every time. That texture is why Emerald feels bigger than 8 gyms and a league. It feels like a place where you spent time. The other game that shapes Emerald is FireRed. FireRed and LeafGreen came out in the same generation, right between Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald in the West. And they are important because they solve a different problem. Ruby and Sapphire had to show Pokemon could move forward. FireRed and LeafGreen had to show Pokemon could go backwards without feeling like a museum exhibit. They clean Kanto up, make it readable, keep the shape of the original adventure, and take away most of the rough edges that made the cartridge feel like it was being held together with fishing line. FireRed makes Kanto look the way you remembered Kanto looking. Emerald turns Hoenn into something worth remembering in the first place. Those are different achievements. FireRed has nostalgia built in. It is working with Pallet Town, Viridian Forest, Brock, Misty, Team Rocket, the whole original road trip. Emerald did not have that. Emerald had to make its own nostalgia, and in real time, and it did. That is why the Game Boy Advance Pokemon era feels so strong to me. It has both halves, the cleaned up version of the old place and the fully settled in version of the new one. Together, they make Generation 3 feel like Pokemon figuring out how to respect its past without getting trapped in it. Emerald is more than Ruby and Sapphire with a green box. I mean, it is a little bit of Ruby and Sapphire with a green box. Third versions have always had some amount of, hey, remember that game you just bought? What if we sold you a better one later? Nintendo has been very successful with this business model, but Emerald does enough that the whole region feels more complete. The biggest obvious change is the story. Ruby focused on Team Magma and Groudon. Sapphire focuses on Team Aqua and Kyogre. Emerald brings in both teams and lets the whole land versus sea conflict feel like the actual center of the region. That helps Hoenn a lot, because Hoenn is already visually built around the conflict. Volcano and ocean, desert and rain. Dive routes 1 minute and mountain paths the next. So having both teams active at the same time makes the story feel less like version flavor and more like the region's whole argument got out of hand. And then Rayquaza shows up. Rayquaza is such a perfect third legendary because it looks like it was designed to interrupt two other gods and tell them to take it outside. Groudon and Kyogre are fighting over the weather. Rayquaza comes down from the sky like a green substitute teacher with tenure. Everybody stops. Beautiful. No notes. And part of that is probably Destiny Deoxys, the movie. I loved that movie as a kid. It made Rayquaza feel gigantic in my head. The Emerald box had already had the cool green legendary. Destiny Deoxys made it feel like this ancient thing in the sky that sees Deoxys show up and immediately treats the atmosphere like its own private property. So when Emerald puts Rayquaza above Groudon and Kyogre, it lands harder for me. The game has the weather dragon. The movie has Rayquaza fighting a space alien in a futuristic city. Together, that made Gen 3 feel stronger to me. Like Emerald was part of a bigger little world instead of just the game I owned. Emerald also gives Hoenn a stronger identity through a pile of little changes. Animated battle entrances, more double battles, gym leader rematches with new teams, the battle frontier, a title screen and opening that put Rayquaza in front instead of leaving it as a bonus dragon hiding. None of these alone would make Emerald the greatest Pokemon game. Together, they make it feel like the version where Hoenn finally exhales. Ruby and Sapphire are the foundation. Emerald is the place fully furnished. I do want to be fair about the water, because if someone says Hoenn has too much water, I'm not going to sit here and act confused. It does. Sometimes Hoenn's ocean feels less like exploration and more like you have been sentenced to community service by the Sea Foam Island courts. I get it, the water routes blur together, surfing is slower than walking, diving is cool, but it can also make navigation feel like the game folded itself in half and threw it in a sink. So yes, too much water is a real complaint, but is also part of why Emerald feels like Emerald. If you remove too much of the water, Hoenn loses its whole vibe. It loses the feeling that the region is spread across coastlines and islands and strange little pockets of land. It becomes more efficient, but less itself. And summer is not efficient. A perfect summer day in your memory probably had a lot of boring parts. Waiting in the car, getting sand in places you didn't want it, eating a melted popsicle that was pretty much just soup at that point. But the boring parts are somehow glued to the good parts. Hoenn's water is like that. It is annoying sometimes. It is beautiful sometimes. And sometimes it is just you, surf, and a playlist of ocean music. And the crushing realization that every tentacle in the region has your phone number. But when I think of Emerald now, I do not really remember the efficient parts. I remember the long blue routes, finding the dive spots almost by accident, Pseudopolis opening up like a secret, and Pacific Log making no particular sense and still being one of the most memorable towns in the series. The water is the complaint, but the water is also the postcard of the game. Then there is the Battle Frontier. For a lot of people, this is the obvious Emerald argument, and it kinda should be. The Battle Frontier is one of those Pokemon features that makes the game feel bigger just by existing. Even if you did not fully understand it as a kid, especially if you did not fully understand it as a kid. You beat the Elite Four, you think you're done, and then the game basically says congrats. Welcome to the island where adults with perfect Pokemon are going to humble you in 7 different architectural styles. There's a tower, a dome, a factory, a pike, a palace, an arena, and a pyramid. All of them owned by a frontier brain. None of them are happy to see you. That is not a post-game. That is a theme park for people who knew what EV training is. And as a kid, I did not master it. I do not want to pretend I was there sitting with spreadsheets and optimal movesets. I was probably using a starter, a legendary, and 4 emotional support Pokemon. But that almost makes the frontier better in my mind. It feels mysterious. It feels like there was a higher level of Pokemon hiding inside the cartridge. The main story was the summer adventure. The Battle Frontier was the older kid part of the pool. You could see it, you could technically go there, but you knew very quickly that the water was deeper than your confidence. Critics at the time mostly treated Emerald as familiar, and they were not wrong about that. If you already owned Ruby or Sapphire, the review basically wrote itself. But that is a very adult way to look at this game, because when you're a kid, getting the fuller version of a game you already liked is not a problem. It's incredible. More stuff in the same cartridge was the whole pitch. More battles, more secrets, more places to lose to a frontier brain. And one more chance to convince yourself that this time you're definitely ready right before you folded like a lawn chair by a Pokemon you just did not respect enough. The Battle Frontier made Emerald feel like it did not end at the credits. So why call Emerald the greatest Pokemon game? Not because it is the most ambitious, the most modern, or the one of the biggest world. None of these things are true. It is the greatest to me because it gets the balance right. It is still compact, you can hold the whole region in your head, the same way you can hold a small map for a place you actually went to. But the cartridge is also full. The systems make your team feel personal, the side stuff makes the world feel lived in, the post-game makes it feel bigger than it is, and the atmosphere is strong enough that even years later, one song or one screenshot can pull you right back in. It also sits before Pokemon became completely online in the way we think of games now. Yes, it had trading and battling and link cable culture, and later wireless adapter support. Connection has always been a part of Pokemon, but Emerald still feels local. It feels like school, siblings, neighbors, cousins, sleepovers, and that one friend who definitely had a better team and was unfairly calm about it. The game was social, but not endless. You could not open an app and find the mathematically correct way to enjoy Hoenn. There were rumors, playground nonsense, guidebooks if you bought one, forums if you were getting fancy, and at least one kid in your life swearing you could get Jirachi from under a truck. Because Pokemon rumors are all apparently legally required to involve trucks. That limited information made the world feel bigger, not better in every practical way. I'm not going to pretend confusion is always magic because sometimes confusion is just confusion. But Emerald came from an era where you could still feel like a game had corners you had not seen. The Reggie puzzles, the dive spots, the secret bases, and the whole thing still looked and sounded inviting. Emerald is warm without being soft. It has hard battles, it has annoying routes, it has caves where you absolutely run out of repels because you are young and financially irresponsible, but the game keeps pulling you forward, because Hoenn is pleasant to exist in. That is harder to make than people think. A lot of games are fun to beat. Emerald is fun to be inside. That is why it lasts. I don't know if Emerald is objectively the best Pokemon game. I do not even know if that is a useful thing to argue about for very long. Pokemon is too personal for that. For a lot of people, the best one is whichever one their friends were playing the same summer, or the one with their favorite starter Pokemon. But Emerald is the one that feels most complete to me. It has the old Pokemon structure, the Game Boy Advance color and sound, Hoenn's beaches and rain and forest and too much ocean, and a post-game island that looked at the Elite Four as a cute warm-up. It has that feeling of a summer game you could carry around, a little world in your pocket. Not perfect, not frictionless, definitely not dry, but warm. And I think that is the part that stuck. Not just beating the league, not just catching the legendary, The feeling of surfing across a bright ocean with nowhere urgent to be. The music looping, the screen slightly too dim, the room too warm. The battery light eventually turning red because even the hardware was trying to give you a dramatic final act. And you kept playing anyway, because for a little while, Hoenn feels endless, and summer does too. That is all I have for this video. If you enjoyed watching it, please subscribe, it helps me out a lot. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again next time. Comment below what you'd like to see next. If you enjoyed this, what your thoughts on Pokemon Emerald, thoughts on any Pokemon games, or just anything in particular, let me know. I'll see you around. Thanks again.